Hello and welcome to the second video in the breakdown of The Feeling. Now this is going to be kind of a low effort video for two reasons. Number one, the sort of fast overview at the beginning is kind of pointless for this one, so the format is broken down already. And second, the original source sound is just a sound font, so there's no point making it from scratch or anything like that. I just punched the mic, sorry. So that's not it. What am I looking for? I'm looking for the harpsichord. So this is it. So basically, my thought process for this is that I wanted a harpsichord. So the very first thing I did was punch the mic, whack open a web browser, and search Google for harpsichord sound fonts. Now I don't like using contact libraries and that sort of thing just because I try to make music with minimum piracy, which is why I wanted to use some sort of free sound font. Oh, and also, whenever possible, I like to go to PAX instruments, and there's usually some decent instruments in here, and in legacy instruments as well. But there wasn't a harpsichord built into FL Studio, so I found this website. I'll put a link in the description. It's this, the Small Italian. This is the exact harpsichord sound font that I used. But if you downloaded the project, you already have the sound font, because it's in the zip file. That's why the download is so absolutely huge. It's because there's like 120 megabytes harpsichord sound font in the middle of it. So sorry about that. But if you download it from the website, then you're going to have to download another program called sfArk, which I suppose I could link in the description to extract it and get the actual sound font out. But enough of that. All you need to do is just drag the file straight into FL Studio and it'll put it in a channel for you. So, as for the original source sounds, there's obviously not much to talk about since it's just a sound font. All I did was whack in the sound font, excuse me, and then click this patch selection thing here, which enables you to choose which one. There isn't one loaded by default, so as soon as you drag it in, it will be silent. And to load a patch, you have to click this part and then choose which one you want. Anyway, all I did was change the decay and sustain a tiny bit. Because, if I turn off the effects, I wanted something short and sharp, something sort of stabby and plucky. And these sliders, if you leave them at the bottom, then it's just disabled, like off, doesn't do anything. So I wanted these, like, the smallest amount possible without disabling them. So I turned them up a tiny amount. So without them, with them a tiny bit. So it sort of makes it a little shorter. It's really not much though, I suppose. Anyway, as for the effects, there's a lot, but they don't really do very much. Now, this Maximus is kind of a symptom of my attempts in this song to not use so many third-party plugins. To replace all the things I used in, like Banana Loaf, for instance, such as Ambience, OTT, the Bit Crusher, all that stuff, to replace them with their fruity equivalents that do the exact same thing. So here is Maximus replacing OTT in this case. All I did was turn up this handle on the high a bit and make this funny curve shape in the mid section. So I'm going to try and explain a bit more about why I did this in the mid section in a moment. So I'll leave this off for now and come back to it in a bit. So I suppose it's kind of a bit like an EQ, I suppose. All it really does is just turn the high up a load, I guess. Next is the Transient Processor. Now, I don't really want to explain too much about what this actually does, but it's basically a compressor, but just with, different knobs to normal, which make a very specific thing more convenient, and that is to sort of shape the attack and release of the sound. So, attack and release knobs here aren't how fast the compressor is acting. More, it's sort of how loud what Transient Processor thinks the attack and release sections of its input are. So it's designed to take input which has like loud, stabby parts in it, and make the attacks of each individual sound it receives louder or quieter, and the releases, and so on. E.g. drums, basically. This is absolutely perfect for drums. So that makes it kind of obvious what it does. So basically all I used the Transient Processor for here was to shut the release up a bit more, and to sort of turn up the attack, I guess, to emphasize the difference, to make it shorter and stabbier and so on. just to sharpen things. Now, Convolver is a plugin I've started using recently, initially to try and replace ambience, but then I decided that Fruity Reverb was actually quite good. But I think it adds kind of an interesting effect if you use the Convolver with a very, very short impulse. And Image Lines seem to agree, because if you look in where impulses here, there we go, this is a load of sounds that come with FL Studio designed to be used with the Convolver. So it's just impulses from real life spaces, basically. And what Convolver is supposed to do is do some sort of black magic to these impulses and apply them to your sound somehow. So you could just clap in a cathedral, record the result, drag the recording of you clapping into Convolver, and it would somehow magically apply the cathedral reverb to your sound. And all I used here was one of the impulses. You can guess from the name which folder it came from, I suppose, but I think it's a guitar cabinet. Just because I was just dragging loads of random ones in, and this one happened to sound quite good. Yeah, there we go. EQ, really nothing special going on here. This one's kind of self-explanatory, so I'm just going to skip this. Next is the delay. I already have a video on this exact same thing, but they're getting kind of old now and they all have my old name on them, so I'm probably going to remake them at some point. But basically what this is a delay with an incredibly short time. Now this is called tonal delay because the delay time is so incredibly short that the sort of repeating delay portion has a frequency. It sounds like it has a pitch, which creates kind of a cool effect. I just think it makes it sound like you're kind of in a small room. Probably because when you are in a small room and you shout really loudly, this is exactly what happens. Which is very cool. Dimension Expander. This is a free third-party plugin. Really not much to talk about here. All it really does is sort of make a short delay between the left and right channels. You can do exactly the same thing with Stereo Enhancer just by changing the phase offset a bit. And perhaps that's what I should have done, but never mind. And that's it for this sound, except for this huge reverb. And this is exactly the same thing I did in the previous video. So if you listen to this, you see this, these reverb envelopes here, these automation clips, these are on the bass. No, wait. And you notice that they're disabled in the introduction just because I think it kind of gives you too much to think about. Anyway, so that just about does it for that. Now to talk about that Maximus from earlier. Basically what I was trying to do was emulate what OTT does. Now OTT is what they call, well, what the maker calls an upwards downwards compressor. So if I find something with OTT on it, you'll see these black parts here. So everything below the black part is turned up, everything above the black part is turned down. This is below and above in volume, by the way, to try and squish it into this black region here. So it turns the quiet stuff up and the loud stuff down, and you can do overall gain and things like that. So that is really all this shape is doing in Maximus. Wait, that's the wrong thing. Let me find it again. It just boosts everything below the handle and cuts everything above the handle. If you're going to do that, I turn up the pre a bit to try and get it to sort of stay here. So the more you turn the pre-gain up, the more the effect will be. And obviously the more tension you have here, the greater the effect will be as well. And just use post to adjust if necessary. And also I turn the attack up a bit because basically what happens is, without any compression, obviously not accounting for the post gain, it would be a lot louder. So if you have an attack, you end up with a very loud part, but then the compressor comes on, it quickly turns it down. So you end up with a big loud spike at the start, which is a nice sharp at the start, as the compressor quickly comes in to turn it down. So basically what I do when I copy OTT in Maximus is get Maximus, Usually I'll do something like this with the double curve shape. Bang. Turn up the pre a bit, maybe adjust with post, turn the attack up until I get the right sort of region, and then there you go. That is how I do OTT now. And I'm willing to bet money that that's exactly what OTT is doing behind the scenes. Now, there are also 2 more harpsichords, which are the exact same sound font, but just with different patches chosen in this menu here. Now, the second one I'm going to talk about is this one. Whoops, this one. And thank goodness there's barely anything to talk about, because I left all these knobs at the default, well, sliders at the default, and there's no effects on it at all. The only reason it's in an effects channel at all is because then it's subject to the side chaining, which I will talk about much later. And the very last thing in this video, the last sound, is the third harpsichord, which is this one that plays here. And it plays in a couple of other places too. Here, for example. So, really it's the same deal. It's just whack a harpsichord into the step sequencer and various effects. The first one is an OTT, which is just a compressor. All I really did was turn each band up a bit and turn the depth right down. Yeah, OTT isn't a very complicated plugin. A bit more Transient Processor for the exact same reason as the other one, purely to make it sort of short and snappy. EQ just to cut the sub out and boost the mid a tiny bit, but cutting the sub out was unnecessary because of this, but not important. Dimension expander, piece of piss. Reverb, and finally a massive reverb. And the only place where that huge reverb is used is right at the end here. Like that. That's it. I suppose something I forgot to mention is the fact that I changed the release a tiny bit, but really that's not a huge thing. Another thing to talk about is this part right at the end, right about here.
In that tune, you know that feeling, don't you?
Because of this thing here. Now, all I did to make this sort of reverse harpsichord is just take a very, very short piece of harpsichord. So it wasn't this piece, but I'm just going to use this bit for an example. All I did was take some sort of harpsichord note, put an absolutely gigantic reverb on it. Like that. In fact, it may actually have been this exact part. Record on play, and I'll show you why in a moment. So this is an Edison on the master, recording on play. The reason why you record on play is so that you can... Well, actually, that was completely useless. Doesn't matter. You don't need to record on play. But the point is, it creates this little song jump marker, which you can double-click. Which, if you already have a load of junk in Edison, is very useful. But I suppose it didn't really make sense here. Anyway, then you can just reverse it. And there you go. So that's all I did there. I also used the exact same thing somewhere else. Where was it? Get your instruments and come along with me is what I'm looking for. Yeah, right here. This is just a duplicate of the sound, but just with, on the E3 generic mode, the pitch taken down a bit. So it matched the right note. Also, another thing to mention is that in this harpsichord pattern here, just to make it sound sort of cooler and wider, I suppose, more natural, all I did was duplicate each thing, take it up an octave. So I just duplicated all the notes, took it up an octave, and moved the top ones to the right by a sixth of a step. Now, the sixth step number isn't particularly important. What I usually do is just hold Alt and use the left and right arrow keys to move it a tiny bit at once. But for whatever reason, this time I just decided to do it by a sixth step. And there you go. Nice. That does it for the harpsichords. The harpsichords are now complete. They're just sound fonts with a couple of jazzy effects on the end to sweeten them up a bit. I suppose I could talk about the trumpet now, which I was going to talk about in the last video, but, well, the last video was long enough. And it's kind of relevant here since it's a sound font, I guess. Now, the actual trumpet itself, I cannot remember where I found it at all. I think I just googled for brass sound fonts at some point, like 2 years ago or something, and found a nice little pack of brass sound fonts somewhere. It's the exact same pack of sound fonts that this is in, which I'll talk about way later, I think. But this trumpet is just, well, it's a trumpet sound font with decay and release turned up a tiny bit to make it shorter. Little bit of EQ. Well, actually quite a lot of EQ, to be honest. Transient Processor to shorten it even more, so to turn the release right down and turn the attack up quite a bit. Just to clean it up, to sort of shorten it a bit, to get rid of that annoying tail. Maximus with nothing totally special going on, just turning up the low and high a little bit, I suppose. And finally some reverb. You never ever hear this trumpet on its own, and you only hear it alongside this guy, which is why they're in the same pattern. So that's that. Also, there is a huge load of stereo separation on it in the mixer, sorry. I don't actually know what stereo separation does. I suspect it just turns down the parts of the signal that are the same in both ears. But goodness knows. So the reason why is just for mixing reasons, just because without it, because I'm playing two things at the same time which always go together in a layer. And so in order to help the trumpets stand out a bit, I made the trumpets really wide, and the other thing was already sort of really mono, so it sort of helps it stand out. Anyway, that does it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. You may not have learned something, but hope you did anyway. See you in the next one, which will hopefully be a little jazzier.